Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Rowing Chat. I'm Rebecca Caro, the host of the podcast, which I started in 2013. If you want to subscribe and get notifications of each episode as they publish, go to rowing.chat or just look in any podcast app. You should find us online. Now, today I'm delighted to welcome as my guest John Wojtkiewicz. John, welcome.
Hi, Rebecca. Nice to be here. I've been listening for years. Big fan, and just you're doing great work. All the information sharing and the knowledge share, and it's a great pleasure to be with you.
Now, I first noticed you, since we, I suppose, technically haven't been formally introduced, when John published a LinkedIn article that was called Rowing as a $0 billion industry, How We Devalue Our Own Sport. Now, you wrote this a year ago, and
Yeah.
it opens with a wonderful challenge. Where are the professionals, the marketers, and the investors in rowing? More succinctly, where is the money? Now, John, what motivated you to write this?
Well, it's a great question, and golly, it has been a year, hasn't it? I hadn't really thought about it, but I think it captured a lot of people's attention when it came out, because I think as people, like us and others who have spent a good portion of our lives in this community, we've sort of spent a lot of time looking around thinking like, God, this is such an amazing sport. It's such an amazing community. Why is there not more investment in it? Right? Why is there almost no professional quality to our community, to what we do? Right? I think it's and I've had this conversation several times. Rowing is one of the few sports where there's nobody that you can definitively say, yes, this is a professional rower, professional athlete. I mean, there's certainly some athletes who have been able to make a career out of it, but they're select and very, very high level and top performers. And there's certainly no professional competitive league within. Although there's been some attempts over the years, and there's still ongoing. But there hasn't been any really major investment in the sport, and it's asking the question, well, why is that? Right? Why is that? Why is there nobody interested in investing? I sometimes I like to use the examples. I'm from Southern California. Stand up paddleboarding is a professional sport, and that's been around for maybe 30, maybe 40 years. And rowing's been around for over 100. And there's professionalism back in the day, right? We all know about that, and that didn't go well because of the sports betting and whatnot. But why does it not exist at the professional level for rowing today? And that sort of prompted me to take a look at it. Why is that? And maybe it's something endemic to our culture. And I think that's the part that really resonated with people, was not asking the question. We've all asked the question, but the perspective that maybe our community, maybe our culture is part of the problem. It's not that nobody's interested in investing in rowing, but maybe there's a quality of our culture that wants to keep that out, that wants to keep that away. And that was really what the article was about, was like, okay, well, let's look at why that is.
So, jumping to the chase for those who haven't read the article, what is the reason?
Well, and it's interesting. I didn't really get a lot of pushback on this. I got a sort of like a little bit of side eye maybe, but ultimately we, without pulling any punches, we tend to cheapen our own sport. We have people who are not at the sport level, people that go out and do it every day. They don't want to spend the money on what is really a high value experience, right? They want to keep it insular, and they tend to hold on to a lot of traditions. As we all know, it's a deeply, deeply traditional sport, which is one of the most amazing things about it. but it's those traditions that can keep people out as well, and that keeps new people from joining, but also it keeps investors out, because an investor comes in and says, well, I want to invest in the sport. Let's have a professional racing league. And then somebody says, well, yes, okay, but you have to do it on our terms. And the investor or the marketer says, well, the tradition's great and that's important, but we want to do it in a way that is going to reach a very broad audience. And that's where the disconnect happens, I think, because I think, people in our community, rowers in our community will not everybody, of course, but whoever is having the conversation will stand up and say, well, you have to use this terminology. We get really, really finicky about this stuff. We say, you have to use way enough, and you have to call this the bow, and you have to call this the stern, and this is port and starboard, and you got to use all this terminology. And we kind of get unnecessarily bent out of shape when people, they don't want to say that, or they don't want to use our nomenclature, right? So I think I think it comes down to a potential unwillingness to maybe put aside some of those traditions, or at least compromise on them, for the sake of bringing in greater interest in the sport, more investment, et cetera, et cetera.
One of the things that resonated particularly with me was an example you drew by comparison with a golf club, where you explained that most golf clubs have what they call a pro, a paid professional who's the coach, who is available for hire for any of the members of the club, and how few rowing clubs actually have anything equivalent to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, right? I mean, most clubs have coaches in place, and in the United States, it's entirely possible that a large club could have a staff of coaches that are, in terms of worldwide standards, just reasonably paid. Not making a living at it, but compensated nonetheless. Whereas, you look at a golf club and there's definitely at least one pro on staff, and that person is making a living wage and maybe even doing potentially very well, depending on the level of the quality of the club. So I think that's a great example. I think the model of, country club or golf club, what they're really selling is an experience, from the point where you drive up to the club, get on the course, and then drive away. You're paying for that. And I think rowing organizations, around the world, and I mostly speak to things in the United States because that's my level of awareness. I think there's something to be learned there, right? To consider the experience of an athlete, amateur athlete, masters athlete, from the point, not just when they get out in the water, right? I mean, we all know rowing's awesome. Once you get out in the water, it's great, right? But what does that experience look like from the parking lot to the water, and then from the water back to the parking lot?
Let's walk through that. Let's be really explicit about this challenge. So I'm a newbie and I drive up or cycle up to a rowing club. Talk me through what the experience is.
Well, I think it varies from club to club, obviously. And again, I want to be sort of disclaimer, all my experience is exclusively in the United States when it comes to this. So, so I beg some indulgence here. But let's say it's a mid-tier club with a fairly involved community, maybe 200 members, maybe 300 members. They've got their own boathouse, 2, maybe 3 boat bays, an upstairs space for training. They have locker rooms, showers, et cetera, et cetera. So typically somebody, depending on their schedule, I'm presuming it's an adult athlete, a master's athlete. Let's speak to, I think, the majority of your audience here. They maybe get there early in the morning. They get to the boathouse. Either they're prepped and ready to go, wearing all their rowing gear, and so maybe they do a short warm up. Okay, so what are they warming up on? How are the ergs? How are the rowing machines? Are there rowing machines that are readily accessible? Do they have to take them out? They have to set them up. We all know what it's like when you get an erg down and then the batteries are dead, right? Like, okay, or right, like some of these things can be very, very frustrating, and it happens all the time, right? You pull an erg down, the batteries are dead, and you're like, okay, where are the batteries? Okay, you get through that. You do your warm up. You do a little bit of stretching. Where are you stretching? Are there mats? Are you stretching on a bare floor? Is it a wooden floor? Is it a concrete floor? How comfortable is it? Are you stretching on the dock? Take that into consideration, right? Then it's time to get hands-on, get the boat out in the water. Either you're doing that as a single sculler, or maybe you're in a crew. Is everybody there, right? Are you going to make any phone calls to make sure that everybody who's in the crew is there? Is that experience hard? One thing that is a personal pet peeve of mine, particularly when when it's in a team boat, is you get the boat out, you get it in the water. Is everything in the boat working?
Oh yeah.
Right. It's a huge, and I spend a lot of time at the club that I coach at, making sure that never happens. And that's preemptive maintenance, right? Making sure that there's not something broken when the boat goes in the water on the dock, right? Like to me, that is the start of a really bad day. And that comes down to the maintenance, right? The maintenance of the rowing shells, the maintenance of the equipment. And so that also can speak to that first 30 minutes. I say it's about 30 minutes on average from the car to the dock in terms of prepping, getting ready to go out in the water. I call that the first 30. And then, let's say all that goes all right, right? And then you get out there and then you're on the water and you do your workout, right? And then you come back. Okay, boat comes in. Is there a process for cleaning the boat? Are you on brackish water or salt water, right? What's that like? Is it hard? Is there cleaning equipment ready? Is there fresh water? Some boathouses don't have fresh water, believe it or not, or running water, I should say, running water. Putting the boat back in the rack. Okay, are you doing a cool down? Are you stretching? Like all those things, I think it's really important for clubs to examine that entire process, because I think particularly for older members, they sort of get used to it and they don't think about what that is for somebody that's new to the club, maybe an experienced rower that's new to the club, or someone that's new to rowing entirely, right? Yeah. And then to be somewhat pessimistic about it, worst case scenario, somebody new shows up, they get to the boathouse, they don't know where to go, there's people moving around, everybody seems to know what they're doing, maybe you're signed up for a class and you don't even know where the class meets, there's no one to greet you, there's no signage up, you look around, there's empty water bottles on the floor, old bits of kit and gear lying around, right, that no one's cleaned up. And this is again, like personal frustration for me. Clearly insects or rodent droppings, like that stuff just drives me bananas, right? Because it's a very, very bad look, and frankly, it's unsanitary, right?
Yeah.
I think some people sort of get used to that. They just that's just how the boat club looks, and they stop seeing it, and I think it's worthwhile for club leaders to take a walk through the boathouse and try and see it through the lens of somebody that's new to the sport, experienced in the sport, new to the club. I think these are really, really important things to look at. So is that sort of answer the question?
It certainly does. And it was a real challenge to me hearing you say that, because I am exactly that. I'm immune to it. And yet I know that we could do with a lick of paint in the changing rooms. I know that
Right.
we should probably be replacing our roller shutter doors. I know that we have a constant problem with geese who poo on our pontoon, but we work
Right.
really hard to keep that clean. And we have all sorts of devices. We currently have a swan poo bar, which I'll explain another time. But little things like that, reminding people to replace the bar after they finish rowing, so that it prevents them from
Oh, yes. Yeah.
flying
Okay. I
up onto
understand.
the
Yeah.
dock, and then they won't
Yeah.
do that.
Right.
And it's a very, very clear signal about what you care about. And I'll be really clear, my club mostly cares about new boats rather than the environment in which they row, or the bit of the environment that they can influence. So
Right.
it's a fair point.
Yeah, and I'll say, as I was having this conversation the other day, this is personally for me. I tend to be a pretty clean person. I like to keep things neat, but I think a lot of clubs love the monthly work party, right? Where they get everybody down to the boathouse and we're going to have a big cleanup session. And those are great because there can be a lot of club socializing, right? And then you have coffee and you had snacks or donuts or whatever, and everybody's helping out. And there's a great community sense because you can organize it and you can get a good portion of the membership that otherwise wouldn't see each other together at the club at the same time, right? And there's a good feeling that can come. Okay, we're all working together. We're cleaning the club. The challenge there, of course, is that then the club only gets cleaned once a month. Right. And if you're not a wealthy enough club to afford a cleaning staff, which I highly recommend making that a priority, having professional cleaning services come in. But if you can't afford that, what I suggest is individual assignments around cleaning, right? So that rotates. So somebody's in charge of sweeping out the bays once a week, and somebody's in charge of cleaning the toilets once a week, right? Because those things, they may be unpleasant or distasteful tasks, but they got to happen, right? And if you have that sort of assignment of jobs and are able to rotate them, so at some point everybody's cleaning the toilets, some points everybody's sweeping out the bay, some point everybody is sweeping the goose poop off the dock, then sorry, I lost
I can
Cameron.
still hear you.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very fair point that it's a very fair point that you make. And in a previous club I belonged to, we used to open the bar and sell tea and toast and coffee in between the outings on Saturday and Sunday mornings. And the responsibility to do that service rotated around the training groups. So they had the juniors, the masters, the adult men, and the adult women. And so what was so interesting was that it broke down the barriers. I found that you had to talk to someone who was behind the bar, even if it was just to say 1 cup of tea and 2 slices of toast, please. And so you actually got to meet a large number of people who you wouldn't normally sit with or be in a boat with.
Yeah. I mean, there's a tremendous value behind that, right? And I think you get people together, and then there's a greater opportunity for awareness about maybe larger problems going on with the club and the facility. Like, hey, you notice that the roof is kind of leaky, and then those conversations take place. But and I'm not even advocating getting rid of the get together and the monthly work party. But sometimes I suggest, make the tasks individually assigned, because the more people have to do them, the more they become sensitive to, like, they become very conscientious about taking care of the facility because they know how frustrating it is to clean up empty water bottles on the floor. They know how frustrating it is when there's, toilet paper on the bathroom floor, things like that. And it extends to boat maintenance as well, right? So, certainly a lot of clubs have monthly or even weekly boat maintenance sessions. And if everybody's participating in that, then they become more knowledgeable about how to take better care of the equipment. But they also become a lot more conscientious around treating the equipment appropriately and trying, being gentle with it when it needs a gentle touch.
Now, let's talk about new members, because a lot of boat clubs have the perception that they do not have space for new members. They do a pretty simple bit of arithmetic, which is to count up the number of seats in boats
Mhm.
that they've got, count up the number of members they've got, and point out that at busy times they are close to capacity. Is that
Right.
your experience?
Well, sometimes there's certainly oversight that comes into, and this is the limit of our facility, and this is the limit of our space. I would maybe look at the accounting piece of it and say, okay, but based on the cap numbers or the limit, right, and based on what we're charging per year, per month, whatever, for membership, is that actually sustainable from, in the sense of like, okay, well, we got to keep the lights on, we got to pay for water, we have capital expenses, again, like it's replacing the roof. That's one that always comes up every 20 years. New equipment, we want to bring new equipment into the boathouse. So yeah, a club could say, we can't have any more than 100 people in this club. But at the same time, they'll say, yeah, but I don't want to, nobody wants to pay more than $100 a year, right? And there are still clubs that charge $100 a year for their membership, right? And that's speaking of course of American dollars, but that's not sustainable in my mind, right? That doesn't prepare a club for, either a rainy day or long-term expenses that not sometimes come up all the time and come up without fail. So I would make sure when making that argument that we only have so many athletes or members we can have at this club, that they're doing the financial math behind that and saying, yeah, and then this is our revenue that's going to pay for all these things, right? So either, and that, so many times I've worked with clubs where the math doesn't work, and then it's a choice. Okay, we'll either bring in new people or you raise the dues, right? That's your choice, right? You can't have it both ways. And then and then I tend to push back a little bit when a club says, okay, it's one thing if the municipality is saying, you can only have so many people here. It's very rare that a municipality will put a cap on club activity. But there are limits there. But otherwise, sometimes I say, well, are you really trying? What's your goal here? I think it's important for the growth of our sport that we continue to have community outreach and try and bring new people in. And it's just not practical to keep limitations like that, because people turn over, right? Like
Yeah,
sometimes people are members of the club but they never come, right? They're never there.
that's also true.
Right? And so maybe they're paying, but are they really part of the community in that sense too? So yeah, I mean, I think there's, you have to be sympathetic to options, right?
I think you make some really, really good points there. And certainly, once you understand what are the things that are valued around here, it changes your perspective on, okay, here's the bank balance, and what are we going to spend the bank balance on? And what's the sort of running float we need to keep in the bank balance from quarter to quarter, because of lumpy due revenues and things like that.
Right. I think one of the most common challenges I encounter is that yes, they're the dues are paying to keep the lights on. They're paying to bring in new equipment, to replace old equipment, but there's very very little long-term planning that is happening. Consideration of, okay, what are we going to have to pay for 10, 20, 30 years down the road? And that to me is very problematic, and a little, not just a little, it's significantly limiting.
I came up against an accounting principle recently, which is cost per use. And it was suggested to me that racking private boats in a rowing club is very bad finance, because the racking fees are not equivalent to the value you get from a club boat on the same space.
Yeah, well, I guess it just matters on how much you're charging, right? I think that if people, having your own rack with your own boat is a very, very high value thing, right? It's sort of like your boat that you use, and it should be priced accordingly. And again, I think that's, a lot of clubs will, they sometimes they recognize a very senior member and they can gift rack space to a senior member that's, given decades of insight and service to the club. And that's entirely appropriate, right? But I think sometimes and I've even written about this, I think, where it gets out of control. Well, all of a sudden, you've got a dozen people with private boats and private racks, and none of them are paying for anything, right? And so that, that maybe is a problem. But yeah, I think you just have to make sure that those who, those who are retaining private racks are paying an appropriate usage fee for that. And then it goes back to the conversation about, okay, how much are we paying into the sport, into the club, into the community?
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to new members, I have a theory which I've not yet tested, which is that one of the best sources of new Masters members is the parents of the juniors. And that if you were to run a learn to row course just for the parents so that they know what their children are doing, that actually would be a very good way, firstly, as a revenue generator, but secondly, would get you a small number would want to continue rowing.
Yeah, I think that's a solid idea, and I've seen it executed before. It's interesting because a lot of clubs that have junior athletes or youth athletes, they invariably will have a learn to row day for the parents, right? So a Saturday where all the parents come down, and they get them out there in a boat so they can sort of experience what it is. And those days are great, right? Because the parents are doing something fun. They're sharing it with their child. They get that perspective, and then in the instances where I participated in those events, there's always this is kind of cool. I want to try this, right? And so you may not get every parent to sign up, but from each, let's say you do 2 of those a year, you might get 2, 3, maybe even, depending on the size of your youth squads. You may get a dozen new members every year just from the parents.
Exactly. Give it a go. You never know.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that one of the key problems that you see in clubs is what you call digital advertising and awareness. What's that?
Right. So a lot of the work that I've been doing, particularly the last year, is with clubs in their digital marketing strategy, in the drive to bring in new members, which has been unfortunately severely impacted by the pandemic. A lot of clubs have lost members, right? People have just simply gone away, and so they've been very enthusiastic about replacing their numbers, getting their numbers back up to pre-pandemic levels. And so, well, how do you do that? And I think the digital marketing is the latest and best way to do that now. And when we talk about digital marketing, we're really talking about social media marketing. So social, social platforms like Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, things like that. I think predominantly now that the dominant platforms, particularly for rowing clubs, are going to be Facebook for adults and Instagram for youth. YouTube can play into that a little bit, but that means you're producing videos and things like that, and that can get a little more time intensive. But the great thing about those two platforms, Facebook and Instagram, and I don't work for either of those companies, but the great thing about those platforms is they're connected. So Facebook owns Instagram. So when you advertise on either of those platforms, you can do it together, which is a huge time save. And what you can do is you can have your Instagram account for your club and then your Facebook account for your club. And you can actually create ads on both of those platforms using the same picture, the same video. And you can target people in your community. And the level of targeting that those services allow is really, really impressive. So you can target, if you're looking for more masters athletes to bring into your club, you can tell Facebook, okay, take this picture, take this advertisement that we made, put it in the feed of adults between the ages of 23 or 65 plus, men and women. And if you want, you can even say, within a 10-mile radius of the club, and people that are interested in water sports or people that are interested in recreational athletics. And then your ad will show up in the feed of these individuals, and hopefully you've crafted an ad that is engaging enough to make them, what we say, stop the thumb, right? Stop the scroll. They look at that and they go, what is that? Oh, rowing. I've heard of that. What is that? And then they get engaged. And the most amazing thing about it is it's really, really inexpensive. So, you can reach thousands of people that are your target audience for your club, $20, $30, $40, $50 a day. And that is extremely affordable versus, some traditional media, print and radio and things like that. And you get all the data back, so you can see, the number of men that looked at your ad, the number of women, the number of people, between the ages of 20 and 30 that looked at your ad, what regionally, geographically, where they were. And it's just an extremely powerful medium. And it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. And I think it's interesting because most clubs have a digital media presence, right? They have Instagram, they have Facebook.
So we've got a live watcher who remembers you from your BU years.
Oh golly, who's this? Who's that? They want to reveal themselves?
Sorry, my connection's been really poor, which is
all right. Sorry, we're just hanging out.
Yeah, hanging out.
Fergus. Sure, right. He was an athlete when I was coaching there at Boston University. He's done very well for himself. Good to see you, Fergus. Love seeing your posts on LinkedIn.
Hi, Fergus. And then, oh dear.
Well, just to finish off about the digital marketing piece.
I don't know what's wrong with this.
Most clubs use these services, but they use it mostly for internal purposes. So to share pictures within their community, and they haven't even really tapped into the real useful part of it, which is the being able to advertise their club, their experience. Very, very powerful tool.
And Mustang Shell says, I row on a chain of lakes. I get so many people who ask about my shell. I think if clubs rowed at alternating recreational areas, it would educate more people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I've heard of it before. The idea of the portable rowing club. So you take some singles or some wide body trainers that are easy to teach people to row on, and you put them on a trailer and you just kind of go around. And and again, going back to the social media piece, that's something you can advertise on and say, look, we're going to be at this lake this time. Come down, and we'll teach you to row for $30 or something, right?
It's not a great, it certainly serves a purpose from an education point of view. I don't suspect it's a great revenue generator.
No, you wouldn't do it for the money, but you might just to gain more interest within the community, right? And particularly if you have a large water community, there's some communities that are on bays and lakes, multiple lakes, things like that. I think that could be very effective.
Yeah, my internet's really today.
It's okay.
So, in terms of a 20 to 30-year view, which is a jolly long planning horizon, what do you think clubs should have as a kind of strategic vision? This isn't just about putting the roof back on and replacing it every 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting, right? How does the membership today make a decision about what the membership of tomorrow is going to experience? And I think, I think it goes a long way to crafting a mission statement for the club. And, sometimes people roll their eyes at mission statements, but I think when you're thinking about long-term strategy, those mission statements can really have a lot of impact, can carry a lot of weight. And so, if you're a community club, right, like Community Rowing in Boston, who has an outstanding program, great club, great history, right? Their mission statement very clearly states, why they're there, why they exist, and what their intent is, to what function, what service they intend to offer the community, and that carries them forward, right? In a very, very purposeful and consistent way. And I think you can make that decision today as a club, like, who are we? What do we want to be? Do we? And I think you can make that decision as the club and say, well, we only want very, very high level athletes here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a very small audience, and then the price point to be able to sustain that is going to be very, very high. Or we want to be all encompassing for the community. We want everybody to learn to row. We want to be just a rowing club for cancer survivors, right? Again, very narrow constituency, but very purposeful, and then that can carry you forward, right? I think it's okay to sort of decide collectively as a club today what the intention, what the goal of the club is going forward, and then you can create a plan around that. Like, is that okay? Does that mean we need more space, a bigger boathouse, bigger facility to take those members? Are we enhancing the experience? I think once you have a sort of a goal behind the what the club is there for, then planning becomes a lot easier.
I'm afraid this is really fighting a losing battle. I don't know whether to plow on or give up.
It's your prerogative. It's your time. So I
want people to hear what you have to say.
We're a world apart, so it's.
I used to joke that New Zealand is at the end of the internet because, let's face it, where does the cable go after here? Now,
that's great.
If you'd like to hook up with John, where's the best way to connect with you online?
So I have an active website. They can reach out, through the website. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me. You can either look up Matter Consulting or, look me up by name. My email is very simple. It's just john@matterconsult.com. And I'm happy just to, have a conversation about what your challenges are. I love speaking to people about not just what their challenges are, but what they feel they're doing really, really well. Because that's one thing that we don't do enough in our community is best practices around organizational management, club management, things like that. And I think, that's sort of what I'm engaged with is learning about how clubs are doing things in a really, really effective way, and then sharing or disseminating that to other clubs so we can all be better.
So if I'm a club and I want to hear those best practices, how do I get that insight?
Well, again, it's it's a conversation, and then and I'm an open book, in a conversation. I don't really withhold anything. And then if there's something specific you want me to tackle, either project based or ongoing with the club, in terms of your strategy or even speaking tactically, club management, I can offer some specific insight into that as well. And we can have a relationship, but it's very, very fluid. So I do things either project based or like I said, on a retainer, and I'm really mostly just focused on helping the club find the solution. And if it's going to take a little bit more time, then that's going to be a professional relationship. But if it's like, oh yeah, let's have a conversation, let's see if we can figure this out in a phone call, then that's very simple.
That certainly is. And certainly I feel that the opportunity to learn from others and to share and get this sort of insight is lacking in our sport. Certainly federations do put out, club management and club governance guides, but rarely do they tackle the subtleties of, we have real bottlenecks with getting out onto the water, or
right.
How do you prioritize your spend? Is it refurbishing boats or new boats?
Yeah. And I can give you a little bit of credit, Rebecca, because, you've been on the forefront of that for a while. And the service that you provide to the community is, in that sense, has been outstanding. I mean, I think as much as I've been listening to you, a lot of your talks are about training and things like that, but you're also offering perspective and sharing that, bringing people on and sharing that with the community. That every time I listen to your show, I always walk away thinking like, I just learned something new today. And, and I've been doing this for 25 years. Right. And I still learn new stuff from listening to you. So thank you. Thank you for your contribution.
Well, thank you for those very kind words. And to our listeners today, it's been an absolute delight having John Wojtkiewicz with us today. Your insights into the strategic opportunities for the sport of rowing and for rowing clubs are refreshing. And I think more people need to start these dialogues in their management groups at their club board meetings, so that more of us can put out a better service and keep the sport sustainable and of interest to people. If we become boring and dead end, well, who'd want to be in that club?
I think there's a lot of clubs that are already in that, that are already there. But one of my personal mottos is keep moving forward, right? We have to keep moving forward. And I'm, anything I can do to help a club move forward, I'll give it my best.
Well, thank you for that great insight. And from some of our live listeners, they really like your white guitar. It's super cool. So here you go in the background. There's the guitar collection.
The old Les Paul, sure. I've had that since I was a teenager.
The Gibson Les Paul, I'm guessing.
Gibson Les Paul, yeah.
That's sure sign that I once knew something about guitars. And to our listeners, thank you so much for being with us. My apologies for my spotty internet connection. And until next time, please tell your friends about Rowing Chat. We'd love to have more listeners.